At 5:14 a.m. local time in the northern Arabian Sea, the Combat Information Center aboard the lead Iranian warship picked up a submerged contact moving slowly across the lower edge of the display. It was too deep for visual confirmation, but its course was steady enough to raise immediate concern. No merchant traffic matched its profile. No friendly unit was expected in that sector. The acoustic trace was narrow, controlled, and unusually quiet. The sonar operator leaned in. Contact bearing 094. Faint transient. Possible submarine. In an instant, the mood inside the compartment shifted. Chairs rolled closer. Voices dropped. Radar coverage above the surface stayed constant, but below it, every eye locked onto the same symbol. The captain reacted without hesitation. Classified. The reply came back almost too fast, and that was the first warning sign. Likely hostile submarine. The word hostile entered the room before certainty ever did. Outside, dawn spread a pale light across the sea. Two Iranian warships moved through calm water in close formation, their bows slightly angled apart, their hulls carving white foam into the gray-blue morning. From the deck, the scene looked almost ordinary. No flames, no smoke, no visible threat. Only steel, wake, and silence. Inside the lead ship, that silence was over. Hold bearing, narrow band analysis. The sonar team moved quickly, sorting through machinery signatures, harmonics, blade rate, and intermittent flow noise. The contact beneath them was quiet, but not invisible. It had entered the exact kind of zone surface commanders dislike most. Too close to dismiss, too deep to confirm, too controlled to ignore. On the second Iranian warship, the CIC received the track and accepted it within moments. A second command team reached almost the same conclusion at the same time. Two warships, one underwater contact, one assumption hardening into action. Range estimating inside engagement envelope. The captain gave the order that changed the tone of the morning. Bring tubes ready. Below the waterline, hatches opened. A torpedo crew moved with practiced precision. Mechanical locks were checked, guidance settings were entered. No one aboard could see the submarine they were preparing to strike. They had only a sound, a pattern, and the belief that they had identified something dangerous before it could act first. At 5:15, the lead ship edged slightly to port to improve the attack geometry. The second warship widened its position, forming the classic shape of a coordinated pursuit. The surface formation looked deliberate, disciplined, professional. Then the first active sonar pulse slammed into the water. It traveled downward like a hammer blow. Far below, inside the red-lit control room of a U.S. submarine, every watchstander heard it through the hull before anyone spoke. The sound was hard, metallic, impossible to mistake. The sonar chief remained calm. Active ping bearing 089. The officer of the deck looked toward the captain. Another pulse hit, sharper than the first. Then came the next report. Transient in the water, high-speed screw, possible weapon launch. No one rushed. That was the difference. No shouting, no panic, just procedure compressed into seconds. The captain stepped closer to the plot. Khan, make your depth 150 feet deeper. Come right 3 degrees. Maintain quiet. Aye, Captain. 150 feet deeper. Right 3 degrees. Maintain quiet. The diving officer repeated each order exactly. Control planes shifted. The submarine tilted gently and began descending into colder water. The lights stayed dim. The voices stayed low. On the waterfall display, noise sharpened into a recognizable shape. The sonar chief locked onto it. Weapon bearing steady. Closing. A decoy launcher was prepared. The captain watched the line for a second, then another. Deploy countermeasure. A compact sound decoy slipped into the black water and activated behind them, creating a false acoustic signature, louder, rougher, and more obvious than the submarine itself. The real boat kept descending, engines trimmed for silence, its hull slipping toward the thermal layer, where sound bends and certainty begins to unravel. Above, the Iranian crews believed the strike had forced the submarine into retreat. Inside the lead CIC, the contact changed behavior exactly as expected. That fed confidence, and confidence fed commitment. Target maneuvering, weapon tracking. The captain aboard the lead ship gave another order. Maintain pressure. Do not let it out of the box. The warships accelerated. Their propellers dug harder into the sea. Flow noise increased. Active sonar pulses continued, each one briefly illuminating the water column, each one also revealing their own positions to anything listening below. And something below was listening. Inside the American submarine, the first torpedo began shifting toward the decoy. Its bearing drifted a few degrees, then a few more. The sonar chief spoke with the same steady calm. Weapon diverting. Countermeasure effective. No one reacted. There was no celebration. A new report followed immediately. Additional surface maneuver. Both contacts repositioning. They're prosecuting. The captain studied the display. One torpedo had been pulled away, but the situation was no longer uncertain. Two warships were now fully committed to a live underwater pursuit. The water above was growing louder by the second. That helped and complicated matters at the same time. "Take us below the layer," he said. The submarine went deeper. The active sonar pings weakened, then warped. Machinery noise from the Iranian ship spread wider across the acoustic picture. The sea itself had begun turning against the hunters. On the lead Iranian warship, operators watched their once clean tracking solution begin to blur. The target that had seemed pinned down now felt less fixed, less predictable, less certain. What had started as a direct pursuit was becoming a problem of angles, noise, and missing pieces. Then the symbol shifted again. Not destroyed, not confirmed, simply gone and somewhere worse. At 5:17, the first torpedo ran past the real submarine and continued after the false one into open water. Below, the American boat slipped deeper into the one battlespace surface warships could disrupt, but never fully control. And in that silent descent, the balance of the encounter began to shift. What the Iranian crews believed was a trapped intruder had just disappeared into the one environment where their edge no longer held, and the pursuit was only beginning. At 5:17 local time, the first torpedo was still running blind when the water around the American submarine changed in temperature, density, and sound. Inside the control room, the descent was managed with exact precision. No wasted rudder, no unnecessary speed, no metal-on-metal noise. The boat passed beneath the thermal layer and let the sea begin working in its favor. The sonar chief kept his headset tight against his ears. Weapon no longer on direct intercept, countermeasure holding. The captain never looked up. Do not give them anything. Maintain ultra-quiet. Above them, the two Iranian warships still believed they remained inside the decision loop. On the lead ship's display, the false target kept moving, noisy enough to hold attention, convincing enough to justify continued pressure. The second ship adjusted its position to tighten the gap, engines digging harder into the sea as both vessels tried to close off escape paths. Then another active sonar pulse went out. It hit the water hard, a clean artificial shockwave. For a split second, it illuminated the column below, and when it returned, the picture was messy. Too much reverberation, too much self-noise. Inside the lead Iranian CIC, operators leaned closer to their displays. The contact image was still present, but no longer clean. The target appeared to shift in one direction, then another. Its estimated range fluctuated just enough to introduce doubt without fully breaking confidence. "Reacquire and refine," the captain ordered. The ship turned again. So did the second warship. Their helmsman responded at once, but every course correction added more propeller turbulence, more hull flow noise, and more acoustic clutter to an already unstable underwater picture. Below, the American submarine heard all of it. The sonar waterfall thickened with sound, cavitation from aggressive turns, machinery harmonics from both surface ships, and the sharp repeated crack of active pings. The ocean was no longer quiet, but it was becoming readable. The officer of the deck spoke softly. "Surface contacts increasing speed." "Understood," the captain replied. "Hold course. 2 knots. 2 knots." At 5:18, the lead Iranian warship made its second serious error. Convinced the target had shifted to starboard, the captain ordered a sharper correction and tightened the search pattern. The second ship answered by widening out to preserve coverage. For several long seconds, both warships maneuvered aggressively to contain a contact they no longer truly understood. On their screens, it looked like pressure. Underwater, it sounded like uncertainty. "Contact bearing drift increasing," one Iranian operator reported. "Which contact?" the captain snapped. The pause that followed was brief, but long enough to reveal the problem. The sonar team was now seeing two very different behaviors in the water. One signature was loud enough to track from time to time, almost certainly the decoy. The other was quieter, deeper, and erratic in a way that made classification difficult. For the first time that morning, a troubling thought entered the room. The submarine they believed they were forcing away might no longer be the one that mattered. Inside the American submarine, there was no need for guesswork. The sonar chief had already separated the picture. "Lead surface combatant on our port quarter. Second combatant repositioning aft. Decoy still drawing the weapon noise away." Then he stopped. A new line had appeared. "Additional transient." The captain turned, clarified. "Possible secondary submerged contact. Very faint. Bearing 217. No one spoke after that. No one needed to. The meaning landed instantly. There could be another submarine in the water. The captain did not ask whether it was friendly over the open circuit. He said nothing more than necessary. In that compartment, implication moved faster than words. He studied the display. One American submarine had already been engaged. The Iranian ships were still fully committed. And now, somewhere in the dark water behind the fight, another quiet contact was beginning to trace its own line across the battle space. Above, the Iranian warships kept transmitting active sonar, and every pulse made their own positions more precise to anything listening passively below. They were painting the sea with sound. In doing so, they were also painting themselves. At 5:19, the first torpedo finally ran out of energy after chasing the decoy and expired harmlessly in empty water. No blast reached the control room, only the sudden disappearance of its threat tone. "Weapon expired," the sonar chief said. The captain gave a single nod. "Do not change posture." That restraint mattered. A less disciplined crew might have surged away, changed depth abruptly, or tried to use the moment with speed. The American submarine did none of that. It stayed cold, quiet, and as invisible as possible, while the warships above struggled against the ocean and against their own assumptions. On the second Iranian warship, operators were now tracking two separate uncertainties. A primary contact fading from the picture, and a faint secondary bearing that had not existed in their solution only minutes earlier. The containment box they had tried to close was beginning to open instead. The more they maneuvered, the less stable the picture became. Then one report cut through the CIC. Possible contact to stern. The captain turned immediately. Aft sector confirmed. Unconfirmed, intermittent, low signature. A low signature contact astern meant only one thing worth worrying about. Something had moved behind them. The bridge stayed steady. The sea stayed flat. Sunrise spread across the horizon as if nothing had changed. But beneath that calm surface, the geometry of the fight had already begun to reverse. The Iranian warships had fired on what they believed was a vulnerable American submarine and forced it deeper. Instead, they had entered an undersea problem they could no longer fully map, against a target they could no longer fully track, while a second faint contact drifted into the edges of the picture like a warning. And for the first time that morning, the crews aboard those warships were no longer sure they were the only ones hunting. At 5:19 local time, the sea above remained pale and flat in the early light. Below it, the shape of the encounter had changed completely. Inside the control room of the American submarine, the tactical plot no longer showed a simple escape. The first torpedo was gone. The decoy had worked. The two Iranian warships were still maneuvering hard, still transmitting, still trying to push the situation forward. But now, every turn they made and every active sonar pulse they sent into the water expanded the picture for the submarine they had tried to corner. The sonar chief listened without moving. Lead surface combatant steady on port quarter. Second contact aft opening slightly. Then his attention returned to the weaker trace. Secondary submerged transient still present. Bearing 215. Very low signature. The captain kept his eyes on the plot. No one said what they were all thinking. They did not need to. A faint submerged contact behind the Iranian formation, moving carefully and remaining passive, suggested what the surface ships had not yet accepted. They were no longer pressing a single submarine. They were operating inside a much larger undersea problem. "Con," the captain said quietly. "Come left 2 degrees. Keep it slow." "Aye, Captain. Left 2 degrees." The submarine responded so gently it was almost impossible to feel. That was the point. In the dark water below the layer, danger came from detection, not movement. Every foot of depth and every degree of course mattered. Above, inside the lead Iranian warships, CIC, confidence was starting to drain away. The crew had expected the picture to sharpen once the first torpedo drove the submarine deeper. Instead, the returns were breaking apart. One contact line was too loud and unstable, another was too quiet and intermittent. Range estimates kept shifting. Bearings overlapped. The sea had become crowded with uncertainty. "Rebuild the track," the captain ordered. The operators moved quickly, working through narrow band analysis, bearing drift, time distance estimates, and active returns layered over passive data. But the harder they tried to fuse the picture, the more obvious the central problem became. The contact they had engaged no longer behaved like one isolated target. On the second Iranian ship, the commander arrived at the same conclusion from a different angle. A delayed active return, a fluctuating passive line, and a suspicious acoustic gap off the stern all suggested a contact in the blind sector. "Report aft picture. Intermittent, sir. Low signature. Possibly submerged." Possibly submerged was no longer a comforting answer. At 5:20, the lead Iranian ship turned harder in an effort to recover its tracking geometry. The second warship adjusted with it, widening briefly and then crossing inward to hold the box. From above, the maneuver looked coordinated. Underwater, it sounded worse. Propeller wash spread across the spectrum. Flow noise thickened. The two warships were now interfering with their own pursuit. filling the water with so much acoustic clutter that the contact they most wanted to hold was becoming even harder to classify. Inside the American submarine, that confusion became an advantage. The sonar chief pulled one set of harmonics free from the rest and marked them. Lead combatant opening starboard turn, second combatant crossing behind. The fire control team began building a cleaner tactical picture, bearing lines steadied, speed estimates improved. Every Iranian maneuver meant to contain the submarine instead revealed more of the surface formation's real shape. The captain studied the developing solution. Still no order to ready weapons. Still no rush. That restraint defined the room. This was not panic beneath the surface. It was precision. A crew that had already survived the first strike was now watching the encounter slow into something colder, sharper, and far more deliberate. Secondary submerged contact now clearer. The captain turned slightly toward the sonar station. Direction? Moving along their rear quarter. Slow, controlled, still passive. That was enough. The American submarine hadn't just slipped away from the attack. Somewhere behind the Iranian formation, another quiet presence was now moving into position, one that exposed the surface ships from a direction they hadn't secured. At 5:21, the lead Iranian warship sent another powerful active sonar pulse into the water. It drove downward, spread across the thermal layer, and returned distorted. For a brief moment, the display filled with scattered reflections and false shapes. In that clutter, one operator caught something out of place. A close transient. Not ahead. Not to the side. Below and closer than expected. He froze for half a second before speaking. Possible submerged contact, closer than previous estimate. The captain stepped forward. Which one? The reply came back with hesitation that was impossible to hide. Unclear. That single word hit harder than the missed torpedo. Up on the bridge, nothing seemed different. The ship still cut cleanly through calm water. The horizon stayed wide and open. Morning light continued to spread. But inside both Iranian combat centers, the situation had shifted into something far more dangerous. Awareness without control. Inside the American submarine, the fire control team kept refining the picture in near silence. Lead combatant solution improving, second combatant bearing steady. The captain watched the display tighten, then gave a short, controlled instruction. Hold them! He didn't say fire. He didn't need to. The meaning was clear. Maintain the track, preserve the advantage, and let the surface ships expose more of themselves. Then came the clearest signal yet that the engagement had turned. The second Iranian warship suddenly changed course, not as part of a clean tactical pattern, but as a reaction. Something behind them had forced caution into the formation. The box they had tried to close was now opening from the rear. The sonar chief confirmed it. They're reacting to the secondary contact. That was the moment the mistake became visible. The two Iranian warships had launched their attack believing they had cornered a single submarine. Instead, they had pushed themselves into a much larger underwater problem. One submarine remained intact and tracking them. Another quiet contact was now pressing in from behind. No explosions marked the shift, no visible damage, but beneath the surface, the balance had already changed. The submarine they had tried to trap was no longer just avoiding danger. It was tracking them with growing precision. And somewhere behind the formation, another unseen presence was moving close enough to turn uncertainty into real pressure. At 5:21 local time, the warship still moved fast enough to appear aggressive from above. Below, they were already losing control. Inside the American submarine, the tactical picture had sharpened into something clean. The lead Iranian ship had turned twice in under 2 minutes. The second had widened, crossed back, then drifted out of position while reacting to the contact behind it. What began as a coordinated effort now looked fractured, noisy, and increasingly defensive. The sonar chief didn't lift his eyes. Lead combatant bearing 031, second combatant bearing 068. Secondary submerged contact still aft of their formation. The captain studied the range lines. Any sign they have a solid track? Negative, Captain. They're searching through clutter. That was the quiet center of the situation. The Iranian crews still had speed, weapons, and surface visibility, but in the dimension that mattered most now, they were no longer operating from clarity. They were reacting to fragments. The American submarine remained below the thermal layer, nearly motionless by outside standards. Every adjustment was minimal, almost imperceptible. It didn't need speed, it needed position. "Khan," the captain said, "come right 1 degree. Make turns for 1 knot. 1 knot. Even slower." The helmsman responded with precise, careful control. The submarine edged into a better angle on the lead ship while keeping its acoustic signature close to undetectable. Inside the compartment, movement was minimal. Hands touched controls carefully. Even paper was handled quietly. Above, the lead Iranian warship sent another active pulse into the water. This time, the return came back broken, distorted by the layer, and by the noise of both ships maneuvering too aggressively without a clear solution. The operator studied the display, adjusting filters, trying to pull coherence from a picture that refused to stabilize. Contact intermittent. The captain stepped closer. Which contact? Again, hesitation. Primary uncertain. Possible additional submerged return. On the second Iranian ship, coordination was beginning to slip. Orders still came quickly, but they no longer supported a single clear plan. One officer pushed to continue forward. Another suggested widening to secure the stern. Sonar needed time. Weapons needed classification. The helm needed consistent direction. Instead of tightening control, the formation was starting to open. Inside the American submarine, the fire control team watched it happen in real time. Lead combatant crossing into favorable aspect. Second combatant, no longer mutually supporting. The captain gave a small nod. That was the moment surface commanders try to avoid. Not just losing the target, but losing formation discipline while the target is still nearby. Once coordination breaks, vulnerabilities grow. Blind sectors widen, reaction time shrinks. Every sound carries more weight. At 5:22, the secondary contact behind the Iranian ships shifted just enough to force recognition. On the lead ship's display, it was still faint. Not enough for confidence, but more than enough for concern. Possible contact astern, holding low speed. The captain turned sharply. Holding? Yes, sir. Controlled movement. Controlled meant deliberate. Not debris, not random noise, not a drifting false return. A real submerged contact moving slowly and staying passive behind the formation. For the first time that morning, the lead Iranian warship shifted priority. Break left, open the stern, reassess. The order went to the helm. The bow began to swing. The ship's screws dug harder into the sea, sending water roaring along the hull. On the second ship, the commander reacted immediately, but not cleanly. Instead of restoring tight coordination, he pulled farther away to guard against the aft contact, widening the gap and reducing coverage even more. From above, it looked cautious. From below, it looked like the beginning of a retreat. Inside the American submarine, the sonar chief tracked the shift. Lead combatant increasing turn rate. Second combatant opening distance. They're breaking the attack geometry. No one in the control room mistook that for a finished outcome. Not yet. A pressured surface ship could still act unpredictably. A confused formation could still launch another attack. The risk hadn't disappeared, it had changed form. The captain leaned over the plot. Update solutions. Hold all options. Aye, Captain. Holding all options. The meaning was clear across the room. The submarine now had a developing firing solution on the lead ship. The second warship was exposing its flank in moments as it widened. And the quiet contact behind them, almost certainly another American submarine, was applying pressure without a sound, without a signal, without revealing itself. This was control in its purest form. Not noise, not spectacle, position. At 5:23, the lead Iranian warship sent another active sonar pulse into the water. But this time, inside the American control room, it sounded different. It no longer sounded like a hunter striking. It sounded like a ship feeling its way through dark water. The sonar chief said it simply, without emotion. They're no longer prosecuting. They're looking for a safe direction. On the Iranian bridge, the officers couldn't see what was happening beneath them. They couldn't see the submarine below. They couldn't see the second contact behind them. They couldn't measure how close the danger had actually come. But they could feel control slipping through the reports arriving one after another. Intermittent contacts, unstable bearings, broken geometry, uncertainty in the stern sector. They had fired first. They had forced the opening move. They had driven an American submarine deeper, and now they were the ones turning away. Inside the American submarine, there was no speech, no moment of celebration. The captain simply watched the tracks separate, the formation loosen, and the distance grow, mile by controlled mile. No torpedo left the tube, no missile broke the surface, no explosion marked the shift. There didn't need to be one. By the time the Iranian crews understood they were no longer closing in on a trapped submarine, but instead pulling away from two silent contacts in a stronger position. The message had already been delivered in the only language that matters underwater. Geometry, distance, restraint. By now, the Iranian warships were no longer hunting. They were backing away. At 5:23 local time, the sea looked unchanged. From the bridge of the lead warship, the horizon was still wide and pale in the growing light. The water moved in slow, steady swells. No smoke marked the sky. No debris floated on the surface. No enemy broke the line between sea and dawn. But inside both combat information centers, the outcome was already clear. The sonar picture no longer supported pursuit. Active returns were unstable. Bearings drifted. The stern sector remained compromised by a quiet contact no one could fully identify, and no one could safely ignore. The attack geometry that had existed minutes earlier was gone. Forward contact intermittent, stern contact still possible, low signature. That was enough. The captain didn't announce a withdrawal. He didn't need to. His orders told the story. Reduce turn rate, hold separation, rebuild the picture. Rebuild the picture meant one thing, except that the old one was no longer reliable. On the second Iranian warship, the commander reached the same conclusion from a different display. His ship had widened to guard its stern, but in doing so, it had lost the coordinated coverage needed for a clean pursuit. The ships were still in the same water. They were no longer operating as one. Below the surface, inside the American submarine, nothing changed in tone. The control room remained dim, steady, almost motionless. No sudden movements, no release of tension, just focus. This wasn't a crew coming out of danger. This was a crew making sure danger stayed away. The sonar chief continued tracking both ships. Lead combatant opening slowly, second maintaining distance, secondary contact still aft of their formation. The captain reviewed the lines. No reaction, just confirmation. They're disengaging. The word settled into the room without changing its rhythm. The submarine stayed deep, speed stayed low. Firing solutions remained ready, but unused. In another scenario, this might have been the moment to strike, but that's not what happened. What happened was quieter and more decisive. The American submarine held position just long enough to make the situation undeniable. The lead Iranian warship, which had initiated the encounter, now moved through the water, knowing that somewhere below it was a submarine it couldn't track, couldn't contain, and couldn't force into a mistake. And somewhere behind the formation, at least one more silent contact reinforced that reality without ever revealing itself. The message was simple. You fired first. You lost control. At 5:24, the lead Iranian warship sent one last active sonar pulse into the water. The return came back thin, fragmented, no clear target, no confidence, no path back into an attack. Inside the American control room, the sound passed through the hull and faded. The sonar chief listened, then gave the quietest assessment of the entire encounter. They're checking space, not chasing. That difference mattered. It marked the final shift. The surface ships were no longer shaping events. They were reacting to uncertainty. The captain gave one final instruction. Maintain track. No unnecessary movement. Aye, Captain. Outside, the ocean revealed nothing. No one on those bridges could see how close the situation had come to turning against them. They couldn't see the firing solutions forming below. They couldn't know how many submarines were truly there. They only knew the pattern had shifted. The first torpedo had failed. The attack box had collapsed. The sonar picture had fractured. Their own maneuvers had filled the water with noise, while the submarines beneath them had become quieter, deeper, and harder to reach. That was the real ending, not destruction, exposure. By 5:25, both Iranian warships had opened enough distance to ease the immediate pressure. Their courses steadied, their speed reduced, their posture changed. They were no longer advancing toward a confirmed target. They were leaving a piece of ocean that no longer belonged to them. Inside the American submarine, the crew watched the range slowly increase. Solutions remained available. Still, no weapon was launched. That restraint defined the moment. The submarine didn't need to fire to demonstrate control. It didn't need an explosion to prove dominance. The geometry had already made the point. The Iranian crews had felt it in every uncertain report, every broken track, every forced turn that widened the gap instead of closing it. They had believed they were engaging a single, isolated submarine. Instead, they had triggered a silent response, more coordinated, more controlled, and much closer than they ever expected. The first mistake had been identification. The second had been commitment. By the time they understood both, the outcome was already decided. At 5:26 local time, the northern Arabian Sea looked calm again. Two warships moved across open water under a brightening sky. Deep below, an American submarine held the picture, held its silence, and let them go. They had fired first. Then everything changed. The submarine they believed they had cornered slipped beneath the layer, absorbed the opening move, regained control of the situation, and forced two surface ships to disengage, without ever revealing itself. Underwater, that's how outcomes are decided. Not by noise, not by spectacle, but by the moment one side realizes, too late, that the ocean is no longer theirs.